Denise Trabbic-Pointer. I am currently the Michigan Sierra Club Michigan chapter Toxics and Remediation Specialist. My background is that I am a chemical engineer. I worked 42 years for Dupont, and my career is basically occupational health and environmental management. And towards the end of my career, just before I retired in 2019, January, I was responsible globally for environmental management for a spin-off company from Dupont called Axalta Coating Systems. So,
Okay. And how did you get involved with the LaSalle situation with the Carus?
I have a pretty strong background in emergency response as well. And so our national toxics person, Sonia, contacted me. As people ask her questions, she would field questions over to me during the fire, and I pulled up a couple things, let her know that's potassium permanganate, and then I pulled up a lot of other documents so I could figure out what kind of things Carus made and what chemicals they probably used. I was able to pull up the toxic release inventory and all of that. So that's what happened that day. Then after the fire, things just kind of progressed because the community obviously is very concerned about what came down on the ground after the day of the fire and afterwards. They weren't getting very many answers, and we just started a conversation, mostly by email, back and forth with the citizens, the concerned people there. Ultimately, we had a Zoom meeting, so we were able to kind of meet. And I think the first thing that we physically did was to talk about and then collect. Well, after the February 7th meeting, you had a town hall meeting, or LaSalle did. And at that meeting, Brownfield presented some results. And after watching that, we talked about it. We decided to pull furnace filters and see what Brownfield didn't tell us. So that's kind of where it all kind of really started.
And what did Brownfield test for?
Yeah, they only tested for potassium and manganese, just the two compounds that would be in potassium permanganate. I don't know why. And then there was another variety of results from the Illinois EPA where they took white samples, but we had no idea where they collected them or why. One soil sample. And then we also had data from EPA who were air monitoring during part of the fire and the following day, about 19 hours worth of air monitoring. So we had a variety of information, but nothing that connected itself and nothing that gave a full picture of what the people might have been exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been filling in blanks basically ever since. What's on soil, what's in the stormwater, what's on sidewalks. Yeah.
And what came back in those filters that you tested?
We only sampled because of cost. We only sampled for 5 metals, but they were the 5 metals that I had confirmed that Carus used. And every one of the metals showed up in every filter except for mercury was only in one of the filters, but everything else, it's not something you would have expected to see in a residential home that isn't close to an industrial facility like this. So it told us that, and they were pretty heavily burdened. It was pretty high levels. So it told us that there was quite a bit of this particulate matter that came into people's furnaces and that were caught up by the filters.
And that included, it was copper, lead.
Copper, barium, lead, manganese, and zinc, and mercury.
And what are the effects of that being in people's homes? What are the potential health effects of that?
Well, probably most known to people is lead. Excuse me, is lead. And lead in particular is harmful to children. It's a developmental hazard. It affects the brain. None of the lead levels. Well, here's the thing about the furnace filters. We know that the material was present. We don't know how much was actually in the air or how much the children and the people that live there, actually breathed in. But it's a pretty good guess that it was at levels that wouldn't be happening, to me here in Michigan. So, um, manganese is an interesting metal as well. And what I'm finding out more and more is, well, I knew it already. It's not so much harmful in water, which is
Mhm.
what they use this for. They use it to treat water. They use the potassium permanganate. Uh, but in inhalation is really the most harmful part or hazardous route exposure for a person. And again, children are even more impacted because it impacts, again, the brain. And the study I was just reading talks about um, that they found it in children's hair
Mm.
and in their blood. These children lived next to an industrial facility that made a manganese, which the process I don't understand very well, but it's similar. And they had similar levels of manganese that they found in the soil. And so it's a pretty good correlation uh, to that study, what might be in the soil and things in the dust in the homes uh, in and around Carus.
You mentioned that the manganese was found in blood of some of the children's. Is that something that residents can test for to see if they've been exposed, if they're breathing it in, or
Yeah, metals,
okay.
and particularly manganese can be detected. I would have to do research to find what labs, their physicians could send the blood to. But yes, they do. They can. And they can also, one of the things I'm looking at is surface sampling, that you can sample the dust in the person's home on different surfaces. And with that information and what we already know, I think it would be a good thing to do it. And it would tell you the cumulative because the metals all pretty much have similar impacts. Different metals have target different organs, but there's similarities in how metals affect impact the human body. And if we know that they could touch it out in their gardens and in play yards and things like that, and then
Mhm.
ingest it by putting hands in the mouth and that kind of thing. So you've got dermal, you've got inhalation, and you've got ingestion potential, and that's cumulative. That and the absolute best way to know is testing blood.
Now, there was some talk about EPA release reports in previous years showing that some of those metals were coming out of Carus's, being emitted by Carus at some point. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. What I do know, I've looked through their air permit, and I
Okay.
know what their potential to permit or to emit is of the combination of metals and things that they manage. And they use dust collectors, and dust collectors are not, they're somewhere in the range of maybe 98% effective. They're maybe even lower, 95% effective, depending on if they have good capture, where they're capturing the particulate matter at the source, uh, what kind of filters they have, do they change them out properly, do they have good systems to detect if they have a breakthrough through one of the filters. Usually they do pressure differential on the filters to assure. So certainly every day when they're operating, there was some amount of particulate matter that would maybe contain these metals in it. But definitely during the fire they had a huge increase. But yeah, they're probably meeting their permit. Or I know of one non-compliance that they had, and they were told to, or they either were told or they volunteered to change out the type of dust collector that they had. And that was fairly recent before the fire. I don't even know if they had a chance to install it yet. But
And that was an EPA violation?
yeah.
So how can residents protect themselves from this coming into their homes? Is there a way to filter it or reduce it?
Yeah, the best thing that I've been able to identify so far is to use a more efficient or look at what they have now uh, and get a more efficient filter for their furnace. I'm sorry. It's okay. It's from Jamie.
Going back to the EPA samples tests,
Mhm.
Jamie mentioned that there was some issues with some of the tests, that maybe they weren't done properly. Other tests didn't meet the criteria and were rejected. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It might be in the FOIA documents that he hasn't shared all.
Okay.
I understand that there was something about a chain of custody issue. Um, Again, I questioned, maybe he's talking about, I questioned whether wipe sampling was the right kind of sample to run. He did talk about there being 3 wipes in a bottle, and I think that that was actually might have been appropriate. It's a little bit strange to do that, but I don't think that it was a major issue. So
Okay.
I don't know all the specific of what he's talking about, but yeah.
Now, can you explain to me what a wipe sample is? How do they do that?
Yeah, they take it's about a 4-inch by 4-inch template. So it looks like a picture frame, only it's
Hmm.
made of cardboard, and they place it where you want to take a sample, and they use a wipe that's been provided by the laboratory. Usually the wipe has something on it, like acetone or isopropyl alcohol or something like that, that will pick up whatever is within that square. So it's just telling you what's on the surface in that 4-inch by 4-inch square. So
Okay.
it's real important to do if you're going to do wipe sampling, it's really important to do it representative so that you've got, you're not like just putting it right in the middle of the stuff, or you're not putting it 10 feet away. You want to get good representative samples. We later saw pictures of where they took some of the wipe samples, and they were right in the middle of puddles right on Carus property following the fire. So they were obviously, they're different colors. They already look, you could tell it was potassium permanganate. So, but they
Okay.
did run for more than just, they did run all metals. They didn't just run manganese and potassium.
Yeah, there was quite a bit more on the EPA test results than what
Right.
Brownfield had tested for.
But it really didn't tell the community much, except for there was at least one sample we know of was taken from Jamie's sidewalk, and maybe a few others from other homes, but we don't have any idea where they took them.
Okay. So we don't know if they are from Carus's property or other places.
The first two were definitely from Care's property because
Okay.
they had pictures and they had the number on it. The soil sample was from Care's property, was also quite high. But the
Okay.
rest of them, Jamie's and I think 3 others, we don't. Jamie's we know because they had a picture. The other 3 we don't.
Okay. Um, can we talk about their discharge permit? They have a discharge permit to discharge some of the toxic waste. Can you tell me about that?
They have 2 discharge permits. Now the one is for stormwater and for not non-processed water. So water from their reverse osmosis system, air conditioning, stuff like that, water. So that goes directly to their lagoons and ponds and things, and then it's discharged under that permit. They also have a discharge permit that goes to the LaSalle wastewater treatment plant, which is a sanitary sewer permit. And I just got a copy of it, and I'm not through it all yet, but it looks pretty standard as far as what they have to sample for.
Okay.
And what they can and can't do. And then they just recently, after the fire, they got a temporary permit to treat the firefighting water that went into their ponds, their emergency pond. It would have had, probably significant amounts of solids and things from the fire. And
Mhm.
so they're running it through filters and things like that. And that's what that permit is, temporary, just until they can treat and discharge firefighting water.
So looking at the aerial photos of Carus, they're pretty close to the Vermilion River. Is any of the waste, do you think, ending up in the Vermilion?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, just from I've looked at that facility, on Google Earth, and pondered quite a bit about how their water flows and things. And there's definitely, and they showed there were pictures that the EPA took. I think it was the Illinois EPA that came,
Mhm.
and they showed there were pictures of quite a bit of flow that went around, didn't necessarily go where they were treating the water. And yeah, it's a pretty good bet that some has gone to Vermilion River, and where they should look for that is very near the outfall, downriver, near the outfall, downriver a little bit, and look in the sediment, because that's where it probably ended up.
And the
Metals are
sediment,
heavier. Yeah.
so metals are heavier and they end up in the sediment. They
Yeah.
they sink to the bottom. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay. They also have a landfill that you have mentioned out in Naplate or Ottawa. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, they send when they're operating, and maybe they've sent some since, I don't know, but when they're operating, they send a lot of waste, manganese. It's got mercury and lead and barium and manganese in it. Anyway, it's a mix, but it's primarily manganese. And because and they just pile it up, and I call it land disposal. It's what's really confusing about it, or was surprising to me about it, is it's not licensed or permitted. They have an EPA ID assigned to it, but which means it's waste, but it's not a hazardous waste or even a solid non-hazardous waste landfill. It's not designated as a landfill. So again, they pile it up, and if you look on Google Earth, it's a pretty large area, and they don't cover it. And I believe there's a safety reason for that. I think, but I haven't got my answers back yet, but I think they do that because manganese is water reactive. And if you covered it up and it's had water on it, it would basically, it would explode. So that's probably why they don't cover it, but I have concerns about it being washed into the uh, Illinois River, which is very close. This is in Ottawa. And there are also some vulnerable populations close by, and as you're from there, so you probably know there's a lot of tourists and historical things and walking trails and all kinds of stuff that are pretty nearby. So I'm
It's
concerned about
actually,
what goes in
so
the water, and I'm concerned about what goes in the air from it.
yeah, it's the most popular tourist destination in the state of Illinois. Is Starved Rock State
Starved
Park.
rock, yeah. Yeah.
with about 2 million people per year that visit each summer. So it's affects quite a few people if you consider that.
Hey, I could have gone there when I was a kid. I don't know, but now I am interested, and I probably will see it.
Where I spent my summers, all my family memories, my best memories, vacations, family reunions, all at Starved
Yeah.
Rock. I love the park. So then if it's not permitted, what does that mean? Are they putting it there illegally? Are they what exactly does that mean?
I'd have to think that the Illinois EPA knows about it. Well, if they didn't, they do now because I sent a letter. But I just want them to say, is it hazardous waste or not? Why isn't it covered after a certain period of time? You know, what's the plan? Are you going to cover it at some point? Why don't you have a stormwater permit? Because from what I can tell and what I know of the law, they should have a stormwater permit so that they have some kind of testing to assure that they're not putting it in the river. Just things like that. They can have a not. They could come back and say this is non-hazardous. We tested it. We know it isn't. But we want to hear it from them. We want to see the information, and the people that would live close by, I think, would want to know that they have a plan if something happens, if there is an explosion or something like that.
Yeah, because you said that it's combustible, it's highly explosive.
Well,
So that's
if it's dry,
okay.
just about any dust, if it's finely separated, it's in the air, it's airborne. A
Uh-huh.
lot of dust, even sugar, even flour, things like that can explode if
Oh,
it's got a ignition point or something. But manganese is a little bit different in that, like I said, it's water reactive, so it can kind of, if it's contained or inside, it could actually do more harm than just your regular. My my guess, just from seeing the explosions on video at Carus, what happens with a combustible dust
hmm.
fire and explosion, it'll be up in the rafters. So you got a factory and you've got ventilation systems and things like that. Dust settles on things. And
Hmm.
so whatever sparked that fire and set it off, then it starts hitting all this settled dust and it explodes over and over and over again.
Okay.
That's how they propagate. That's what, because we heard more than one explosion. I did, on that video.
Hmm. Well, that brings me to lot storage, the Southtown Mall in Ottawa, being now being used to store potassium permanganate and several other chemicals, according to the ordinance that was passed back in July by the Ottawa City Council. Um, it's pretty close to 3 schools, I believe. 300 within 300 yards is what the Ottawa Times had printed last week. What do you think about that? And what permits and approvals and fire energy or hazard plans and things like that? Do you know what the situation is on all of that?
Yeah, those regulations, those regulations can be very complex. Yes, but well, first of all, they put out on Facebook, I think it was, the mayor put out something that said that they are properly certified to store what they're talking about storing. He said that the fire marshal and the building inspector said so. But he went on to say that all the operators are CVI certified. Well, that raises alarms with me just because there's no need to have CVI certified operators if you're not storing certain hazardous materials. So
What is, I'm sorry, what is CDI?
it's I'm gonna have to open up something here to get the exact wording. It's okay. Um, Gotta get down to it. I'm looking at what it talks about waste runoffs. Landfill. Okay, it's the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards. They call it CFAS. And what it is it's connected to an air regulation actually that requires facilities that store over a certain quantity of listed materials. And they have to do certain things with how they store it, and the people that work there have to be CVI certified.
Okay.
And that means they must comply with CFAT regulations. And that, like I said, that increases my concerns because the types of things that are stored in a warehouse like that are the types of materials that Carus uses, the kinds that can, they're oxidizers. So if there's a fire, they feed the fire, and they're water reactives like manganese that can start a fire. So these kind of facilities have to have certain things in place, which again, they assured us that they do, but we've not seen the report. And from what I understand, community people have asked to go through the warehouse and have not been allowed to. They need to have, they need to either store things under certain quantities. They need to be separated by 1 or 2 hour firewalls. And I think from what I could tell, 1 hour firewalls, because there's other people in that building, there would need to be a 1 hour firewall between them. They have to, if they do go over or want to store over that quantity, they have to have proper fire sprinkler systems. And they absolutely have to have alarms, but they can be manual alarms, which surprised me. They would have to, actually push a button or break the glass and on their way out. And so I'm not familiar with that, the rest of the mall and what they would have, but the rest of the mall should have some kind of a warning system as well if something happens in the warehouse. And know how to evacuate. There should be evacuation routes around. There should be exit signs and exit routes and all of those kinds of things that you see in actually most any building. But the warehouse itself has to have special protection.
Do they normally keep those things on file or file them with the state or anything like that? Or is this kind of a voluntary, the evacuation maps and things like that?
On the evacuation maps, it's up to the building owner or I've even seen it where the office, that particular office has to make up their own. Sometimes if you go into a doctor's office, I did just the other day, I noticed they've got an evacuation map. They're in a building complex, but they have exit routes marked in their own part of the building. So it's if you have over a certain number, the part of this is you've got ordinances. So you've got city ordinances. The city ordinance in Ottawa says that they have to follow the International Fire Code. The International Fire Code in a lot of different places adopts National Fire NFPA, and that's why you end up jumping around all the regulations. And then OSHA requires certain things. If you have over 10 people employed, you have to do certain things, and that's where sometimes the evacuation routes and those immediate kinds of emergency plans they have to have those in place.
So what do you suggest then for people who are concerned in Ottawa about the LOTS storage warehouse?
I would probably ask more questions of the fire marshal and the building inspector that did it and ask if they could share what they, and just, they've said generally that they meet the requirements, but it would be good to know how they meet them. Do they have the firewalls in place, or do they plan to store under the maximum air allowable quantities of MAQ, or are they going to install? Do they have sprinkler systems already? They have to have a connection for the fire department if they come, and I think I saw that they do have that. It's just fitting on the outside of the building. But we want particulars. I mean, if I lived around there, I would want to know what they have in place. I would also like to see their emergency response plans and what they would plan to do if there was something that happened. How would they evacuate? How would they notify people? And have they exercised that plan? You at least have to do a tabletop or all the people that would be involved, local fire departments and all that. They'd sit at a table and say, okay, we've got an event. We have an explosion. What do you do? And what do you do? And how do you evacuate? And, they need to have exercised that plan in some kind of manner.
Going back to the warehouse in LaSalle, there is a warehouse over there that's called the Apollo Building. Are you familiar with that?
I know of it, yeah, from Jamie, yeah.
Do you know anything about permitting or what's being stored in that building, or what's approved to be stored in that building, if anything?
I only know what it has been in their last 2 years tier 2 report. I know what they've stored, and none of it is the hazardous material. They're not the physical hazardous that I've been talking about, the ones that feed a fire, the ones that are water reactive. What they store were more innocuous. Certainly you don't want to breathe it, and you don't want to have it going into water, but it's not a physical hazard that requires them to do special things. So they should not be storing any of those other things that we just talked about, manganese or yeah.
But the Ottawa warehouse.
No, it's Apollo.
No, but the Ottawa warehouse is
Oh.
approved to store those. I'm sorry, I jumped back.
No, that's okay. No, they say they are. Yeah, they
Oh,
say
they
they're
say they
approved.
are.
Yeah.
Okay. So is
And
there
again,
documentation?
Right, we don't know. Right.
Oh, so we don't know if there's
I don't
documentation.
know that I don't remember if there's a requirement for a permit, a specific permit or not. If they do have one, the fire marshal though would know, and the building inspector.
So is that one a tier 2? The Ottawa facility, is that a tier 2 storage?
I think that's the terminology that you all have been using. Yeah.
Okay. Now that's not a industry terminology then? That's not an EPA.
It's not commonly used in respect to warehouses that
Oh,
every warehouse that we had when I was working was flammable combustible materials, and they had to have similar things in place that I've described for
okay.
lots. We had to have sprinkler systems, and we had to have alarms, we had to have emergency response plans. We were actually inspected quite frequently by the local fire marshal.
Okay.
So and I've never heard them called tier 2. So yes.
That's what Jamie's been calling them. So I thought that was
Yeah.
an industry term for it.
No, it may be common there. It could be
Okay.
because he worked doing something and interacted with it, so that could be what everybody was calling it. I just never heard it.
Is there somewhere that the public can go to get information on these facilities from the EPA, or a website somewhere that if they want to find out what's in there or what the inspection reports or any of that, is that public information that they can access?
Illinois has a system where you can pull information from documents about different facilities. I don't recall I think I did look up lots. I'm not remembering. I'd have to get back with you on that. I don't remember if I found them on a public. There isn't much. There isn't much on them. There's nothing specific. I know that. There's nothing like I could go into Carus and I found their air permit. I found one of their discharge permits. I found some of their not their compliance items. EPA Federal has just Echo, where you can pull up general information. about any facility that has a permit. You know, if they don't have a permit, they're not even in Eagle EPA. And that it would be environmental permits, not fire permits. And I don't think lots is in EPA's website.
Oh, should they be?
Um,
Be
Not if all they have is fire. Um, Let me look quick because I might have. I always pull something from Echo. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything on lots. So
One more question, real quick. On the EPA testing, there was something about them being packed tight, the soil being packed tight, that was mentioned, that it shouldn't have been packed so tight. Do you recall anything about that?
that was, I know that I said something to Jamie about not pack. Yes, he did tell me that. He watched them collecting soil. Um, and he just made mention of it. And I said, that's something that it's kind of a rookie mistake. There's
Okay.
really not a need yet. They're looking for the volume, so they'll give you a say a 250 milliliter jar, and that's what you put the soil in. It's not by grams, so you don't need to like pack it really full. But I just yeah, he brought it up, and I said, yeah, that's a little bit of a rookie mistake. There's not a reason for it, but I don't think it's harmful. You know, it just gave the lab more than they needed.
Oh, okay. So it didn't affect the
Yeah.
test at all.
It
Okay.
shouldn't. No, it would if it was for certain types of materials like chemicals like PFAS. They don't
Uh-huh.
want that tightly packed. They only want 2 grams. They don't want a whole bunch of soy. So, but that's pretty unusual. No, it wouldn't harm their results.
Okay. And then one more question about the EPA is you had mentioned that there was two different reporting, uh, the way that they have reported it, the micrograms into the
Uh,
air,
yeah.
and then it was reported differently. Can you tell me about that?
That's not a rookie mistake. I won't say it was in this case, but that's purposeful usually. I've seen it a lot with consultants that are working for an industrial facility where they will give results in parts per million when the limits are in parts per trillion, you know, so you got to multiply by a million or whatever. And
Okay.
what EPA did is the first, I don't know, 8 hours or so or more of the air monitoring that they did was
Mhm.
provided in milligrams per cubic meter when all of the regulations are in micrograms per cubic meter. So people don't understand that. They'll look at it and they go, oh, that's pretty low, right? Because it's 0.00 something. But no, you got to multiply by 1,000 and then that's your result. So it's something that's frustrating and I don't like it because it's deceptive to people that don't understand.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to add?
We didn't get all the way through because Jamie texted me,
I'm
but we
sorry.
did. No, that's okay. I didn't finish just saying that I think what's important for people that live near either of these places. And I'm
Uh-huh.
talking with a person also from Ottawa who lives right next to US Silica, which is also emitting
Other.
some things. You need to look at getting more efficient furnace filters. That would be helpful, and especially if you have kids or you have asthma or COPD or anything like that, it will take care of the smaller particulate matter. And they put what they call MERV rating, MERV ratings on it.
Mm-hmm.
And MERV 13 is what I would recommend. It's a little bit less expensive than the higher ones, but it's a lot more efficient than what most people have in their furnaces. And
Okay.
change them at least every 3 months. You can, if you look at it in 3 months and you think that's not too bad, maybe you can extend it to 6, but
How safe is it for people to be in their yard with the chemicals that fell from the cloud?
yeah, there's a couple of yards that we've tested and that Brownfield has tested that has levels slightly above the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
But my struggle has been with what's okay for a child. And that's why I finally have come to this conclusion that we need to look at the whole picture. We need to look at their entire exposure for children that live where some of this fell, where some of these metals fell. And for the dermal contact, and I know it's hard sometimes, you're a mom and you're busy and everything, but what's important there is to have moisture hands when they come in. That's just fundamental because what they'll do is put their hands in their mouth and then they're ingesting it. It's the inhalation part of it. It gets dry out, it blows, the wind blows the particles around and things like that. The inhalation, that adds to the problem. And then if it gets in the homes, then when you're in your home, you're kind of captive. There it is. So that's why the filters and that's why we want to maybe look at taking some wipe samples.
From inside the home.
Yeah, because it's that cumulative collective exposure that I'd be concerned about. There is some chance of, if you plant a garden where it's been impacted, that it will be taken up by the plant. Metals can be taken up by plants. So I've not seen, they do have a separate, well, I won't say that because that had to do with the Superfund site. That's nothing to do with Carus fire.
Okay.
But residential soil values, they're all below that. I think in most instances, they're below that. So technically or theoretically, it should be okay.
Okay. When you mentioned about the plants can take up metals, I have read some studies about sunflowers being used to clean up contaminated sites. Do you know anything about
I don't know about sunflowers specifically, but they call that phyto remediation. And it is a valid way to remediate very surface contamination. Even trees, so as you can imagine how far the roots would go, that's about as far as it will treat. But yeah, they actually do that. I
So you
believe
would have to have,
marijuana takes up metals pretty.
really? So they would have to have
Yeah,
a densely packed yard of marijuana or sunflowers for it to
one or
clean.
the other.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds good. Okay. Well, do you have anything else you want to add, Denise? Did I cover everything? Did I miss anything?
I think you did, and if there's anything I didn't, let me know if I missed something. I think it's the permit that I'm not sure of, but I think I think the local community can find out.
Well, this is an ongoing thing that we're learning new things about every day. So it's been an interesting
Yeah,
couple of months since the fire. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
not a problem. It's nice to see you. It's beautiful there.
It is. Thank you.